The airport was packed that Tuesday afternoon. People ran around pulling their suitcases, some laughing with friends, others arguing over missed connections. The usual chaos you see in any busy terminal. Flight 892 to Dakar was getting ready to board, and the first-class lounge had its typical mix of business travelers and wealthy passengers. Among them sat a man who looked completely out of place. He wore simple clothes, a basic black shirt and clean but worn shoes. No expensive watch, no designer briefcase, just a small carry-on bag beside him. He sat quietly, watching people come and go, his face calm and unreadable. Other passengers glanced at him once, then twice. Here was a black man sitting alone in first class, dressed like he'd rather be anywhere else. He didn't look like the usual crowd, no laptop, no fancy suit, no phone calls about million-dollar deals. Just a quiet man waiting for his flight. When the boarding announcement came for first-class passengers, he stood up with his ticket and joined the line. At the gate, a flight attendant named Rebecca greeted each passenger with a bright smile. She had perfectly styled blonde hair and wore her uniform like a badge of honor. "Welcome aboard, sir," she said cheerfully to the businessman ahead of him, scanning his ticket with practiced efficiency. Then came the quiet man. Rebecca's smile disappeared the moment she saw him. She looked at his dark skin, then at his simple clothes, and her expression hardened. "Excuse me," she said, stepping in front of him. "I think you're in the wrong line. This is for first-class passengers only." The man calmly handed her his ticket. Rebecca stared at it like it was written in a foreign language. Seat 1A. First class. Her face twisted with confusion and annoyance. "This has to be some kind of mistake," she muttered, loud enough for others to hear. "Sir, someone must have used your credit card by accident. This flight isn't meant for people like you." The passengers behind him started paying attention. A young woman gasped. A businessman frowned. Cell phones started coming out as people sensed drama unfolding. "There's no mistake," the man said quietly. "That's my seat." Rebecca's voice got louder. "Look, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. We'll get you sorted with a refund, but you need to step aside. You're holding up real first-class passengers." The man didn't move. His eyes were steady but kind. "I bought this ticket. I'd like to take my seat." "You can barely speak proper English and you want to sit in first class?" Rebecca scoffed. "Come on." A younger flight attendant, Marcus, walked over when he heard the commotion. "Everything okay here?" Rebecca leaned in close. "This guy's trying to sneak into first class with what's obviously a fake ticket." Marcus took the ticket and scanned it with his device. It beeped green. "Valid." "It's real," Marcus said quietly. Rebecca's face turned red. "I don't care if it scans. Look at him. Does he really look like he belongs in seat 1A? By now, at least 6 people were recording the whole thing. The man stepped aside to let a mother with a crying baby pass through, then turned back to Rebecca. "I'm not here to cause problems," he said calmly. "I just want to board the plane." Marcus looked uncomfortable. "Rebecca, maybe we should just let him." "Let him what?" she snapped. "Do you want to lose your job over this?" The quiet man sighed and stepped forward. "I'm going to my seat now." Rebecca stood frozen, not knowing what to do. Her authority was crumbling in front of dozens of witnesses. Finally, she stepped aside but hissed under her breath, "Don't say I didn't warn you. We'll see how long you last up there." He walked onto the plane without a word. The first-class cabin smelled like leather and expensive cologne. His seat, 1A, was by the window. He put his bag in the overhead bin and sat down, pulling out a small notebook to write in. Rebecca entered the cabin and watched him for a moment, then began serving drinks to other passengers. When she got to him, she completely ignored him like he wasn't there. A French businessman named Philippe sitting across the aisle noticed the treatment. He frowned. Something wasn't right about how this man was being treated. The passenger hadn't said a harsh word to anyone, but the flight attendant was acting like he'd personally insulted her family. When Rebecca came around with hot towels, she skipped right over the man in 1A. When she served lunch, she practically threw his tray at him. Other passengers were starting to notice and whisper among themselves. "Why is she treating him like that?" asked the woman in 1B. "Maybe she thinks he doesn't belong here," replied the man in 2C to his wife. Philippe had seen enough. When Rebecca passed by again, he stopped her. "Excuse me, but why are you being so disrespectful to that passenger?" Rebecca's face flushed. "Sir, please mind your own business." "This is my business," Philippe said firmly. "I paid for a peaceful flight, not to watch you harass a paying customer." Other passengers nodded in agreement. Someone in the back clapped once. Rebecca stormed off to the galley, muttering to herself. Who does he think he is anyway? In seat 1A, the quiet man closed his eyes and breathed slowly. He was used to this kind of treatment. It wasn't new. But this time felt different. This wasn't just about the color of his skin, it was about something deeper. About dignity under pressure. He reached into his jacket and touched a small piece of cloth, his country's flag. He didn't need to wear it today. It lived in his heart. The captain's voice came over the speaker, "Cabin crew, prepare for landing. 20 minutes to touchdown." Rebecca made one final pass through first class before descent. She stopped next to seat 1A and folded her arms. "I hope next time you pick the right cabin," she said coldly. "You're lucky we didn't throw you off before takeoff." The man looked up at her with calm eyes. "Sometimes the seat we choose isn't just about comfort. It's about what needs to change. I'll keep choosing this seat, not for luxury, but because someone has to." His words hung in the air as the plane began its descent toward Ouagadougou. The city lights sparkled below as passengers prepared to disembark. Rebecca didn't fully understand what he meant, but something about his words made her feel small. As the wheels touched down, nobody on that plane, not Rebecca, not Philippe, not even the passengers recording everything, knew that the quiet man in seat 1A was about to step off the aircraft as the most powerful person on board. The plane came to a stop and the cabin lights turned on. Passengers started gathering their belongings, eager to get off after the long flight. But something unusual was happening outside. Through the windows, people could see a black sedan with tinted windows parked near the aircraft. 5 soldiers in dress uniforms stood at attention beside a red carpet that had been rolled out to the aircraft steps. "Is there a celebrity on this flight?" someone asked. "Maybe a government official," another passenger wondered. Rebecca looked confused. The airline hadn't told her about any VIP passengers. She started to panic, wondering if she'd missed something important in the pre-flight briefing. Then Marcus, the younger flight attendant, approached her with his phone. His face was pale. "Rebecca, you need to see this," he said, showing her the screen. It was a news photo. The same man from seat 1A, but he was wearing a military uniform and standing in front of thousands of people. Flags waved behind him as soldiers saluted. The caption read, "President Ibrahim Diallo, President of Burkina Faso." Rebecca's hands started shaking. No, this can't be right." She looked up quickly to see the man standing calmly by his seat, waiting his turn to exit like everyone else. "Sir," she called out, her voice suddenly soft and trembling. I didn't know. I'm so sorry." President Diallo turned around slowly. His eyes held no anger, no desire for revenge. Just quiet wisdom. "Would it have mattered if you had known?" he asked gently. Rebecca opened her mouth but no words came out. "Respect isn't a privilege for the powerful," he continued. "It's a basic right for every human being." Then he turned and walked toward the exit. Outside, the sun was bright and warm. The soldiers saluted sharply as he appeared at the top of the stairs. One of them opened the car door, but the president didn't get in right away. He turned and looked back at the plane. Inside, passengers watched through the windows. Some had tears in their eyes. Others shook their heads in shame and disbelief. Philippe caught up with him at the bottom of the stairs. "Mr. President," he said, his voice humble. "Please forgive us. I had no idea you were traveling so, simply. It shows incredible humility." President Diallo smiled gently. "Sometimes we must walk among people as they are, not as they think we should be. It shows us what's really in their hearts." They shook hands before the president got into his car. Back on the plane, Rebecca sat in an empty seat, her face in her hands. The weight of what she'd done was crushing her. Marcus stood beside her. "You didn't just disrespect a president," he said quietly. "You disrespected everyone who looks like him." The captain emerged from the cockpit. "There will be a full investigation," he told her. "Prepare for a lot of questions." Within hours, videos of the incident were everywhere. Passengers had posted clips on social media showing Rebecca's behavior and the president's calm responses. The internet was on fire with outrage, inspiration, and shame. News channels picked up the story. Airport staff whispered in corridors. Security officers stood straighter when they heard what had happened on their watch. Rebecca was called into a small office near the gate. The airline manager paced in front of her, furious. "Do you understand what you've done?" he demanded. "You told a sitting president that the flight wasn't meant for people like him. You said he could barely speak proper English." "I didn't know who he was," Rebecca whispered. "That's exactly the problem," the manager shot back. It shouldn't matter who he was. This isn't the first complaint we've had about you either. Rebecca's world was crumbling around her. Meanwhile, President Diallo sat in his official car as the airport director sweated beside him, trying to apologize. Mr. President, we are deeply sorry. If we had known you were traveling. The president raised his hand gently. That's the problem. You only care when you know who someone is. He looked out at the airport building. I didn't travel in disguise to test anyone. I wanted to experience what ordinary people experience. Now I know. The airport director nodded frantically. The flight attendant has been suspended immediately. President Diallo said nothing. His silence was more powerful than any angry words. A reporter rushed forward as they prepared to leave. Mr. President, will you press charges? He looked at her with calm eyes. No. The whole world has seen what happened. That's punishment enough. That evening, President Diallo held a press conference at the presidential palace. He stood at the podium wearing his official uniform, with the national flag behind him. Today I boarded an airplane as an ordinary citizen, he began. I wore no title, carried no entourage, needed no recognition. He paused, looking directly into the cameras. What I received was not just poor service. It was hatred, disrespect, and shame. Not shame for me, but shame for those who believe power only looks a certain way. The crowd hung on every word. I want the world to understand, no human being is above another. You don't need to be a president to deserve respect. You only need to be human. The audience erupted in applause. I forgive her, he said, and the room went silent. Yes, I forgive her. Not because I'm weak, but because forgiveness is stronger than revenge. She has learned her lesson. Now she must choose to grow from it. He ended with words that would be quoted around the world. True power is not in the title you carry, but in how you treat others. Meanwhile, Rebecca sat in her apartment, watching the speech on television. Her phone had been buzzing all day with messages, some supportive, most critical. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. But when she heard those words, I forgive her, she broke down completely. That night, she sat down and wrote a letter by hand. Dear President Diallo, I am sorry. Not because you are a president, but because you are a human being and I failed to see that. I was blinded by prejudice and poisoned by ignorance. You showed strength I've never seen before. You had every right to destroy me, but instead you forgave me. I will never forget this lesson, and I pray that someday I can prove I've changed. Rebecca. She sent the letter, not knowing if he would ever read it, but hoping he would understand her regret was real. At the presidential palace, President Diallo sat in his office as the morning sun streamed through the windows. Rebecca's handwritten letter lay on his desk. He had read it 3 times. The words were simple, honest, with no excuses, just genuine remorse and a promise to do better. His assistant knocked and entered. Sir, we've received hundreds of letters. Support from citizens, apologies from airline staff, even artwork from children. The people were moved by your response, Mr. President. President Diallo nodded. I never planned for this to happen. I just wanted a quiet flight home. I know, sir. But your dignity in that moment spoke louder than any speech. The president stood and walked to the window. It's not enough to just forgive. We must also educate. What happened isn't just one person's mistake, it's a mirror showing what still exists in too many hearts. He turned to his assistant. Let's start a national program. We'll call it the Dignity Initiative. We'll teach respect in schools, train service workers, and promote kindness at every level of society. Let this story be more than just news. Let it create real change. Months later, Rebecca had not returned to her job. She had been suspended indefinitely while the airline conducted its investigation. But she wasn't wasting time feeling sorry for herself. Every day, she volunteered at a local refugee center, helping immigrants and asylum seekers. She listened to their stories, served them meals, and cleaned facilities. She began to see people differently, really see them. One morning, while distributing blankets, she noticed a young African girl sitting alone in a corner, hugging a worn teddy bear. Rebecca sat beside her. What's your name, sweetheart? The girl looked up with wide, cautious eyes. Amina. That's a beautiful name, Rebecca said, smiling genuinely for the first time in months. Kids at school call me dirty, Amina whispered. Rebecca's heart broke. She knelt down to the girl's level. Then they're wrong. You're not dirty. You're beautiful, just like your name. That night, Rebecca cried again, not from shame this time, but from understanding. Words could wound hearts for years, especially young ones. She wrote another letter to President Diallo. Dear Mr. President, I don't expect a reply, but I wanted you to know I'm changing. Not because I was caught, but because I was wrong. Every day I meet people who remind me of you, quiet, gentle, but full of dignity. I see them now. Really see them. Thank you for your silence that day. It spoke loud enough to wake me up. Rebecca. A year later, President Diallo was invited to speak at a university in Ghana about leadership and character. Students packed the auditorium, eager to hear from the man whose story had gone viral worldwide. He walked onto the stage wearing his simple style of dress, and the hall fell silent. My story is not unique, he began. Millions of people face disrespect every day simply because of how they look. Not because they've done anything wrong, but because someone decided they weren't good enough. He paused, looking around the room full of young, eager faces. I was told I didn't belong, called names, treated like I was invisible. Not as a president, but as a man with dark skin. And I stayed silent, not because I couldn't speak, but because I wanted to listen. The students leaned forward, hanging on every word. Listen, he said firmly, to the pain of others. To your own conscience. To that voice inside that tells you everyone deserves respect. Behind him, a quote appeared on the screen that would later be painted on walls, printed on t-shirts, and shared across social media worldwide. If your power makes others feel small, it is not power, it is weakness. The audience stood and applauded for several minutes. Years passed, and many would look back on that single flight as a turning point. The day a humble man in seat 1A taught the world about dignity. The day a proud woman's heart broke and rebuilt itself. The day silence roared louder than hatred. The lesson lived on, not just in books or speeches, but in how people treated the person sitting next to them, whether in first class, economy, or anywhere else in life. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the quietest voices. And sometimes, the most important journeys happen not in the destination, but in how we treat each other along the way.